What's going on YouTube? Clefairy here back with another Scarlet Violet video, and today we're going to be talking about the important speed tiers that you should understand and learn for regulationG. So first of all, again, happy official new year. Cheers to 2025. 2024 was a pretty good year for us, of course. As you mentioned previously, we had a big milestone on the channel where we passed 10,000 subs. Hopefully we can keep that going as we head into 2025. But again, happy new year to all of those watching here, right? But that being said, here we go. So speed tiers. So first of all, again, when you try and team build for competitive Pokemon VGC and you're trying to create EV spreads, one of the things you have to understand is learning speed tiers, because again, we always say that speed is the most important stat in VGC doubles, especially because you can do 1,000,000 damage in the world, but it doesn't matter if you don't get to go first and deal that damage, because if you just get KO'd immediately, then what good is that damage, right? So understanding speed tiers against particular threats that are running around in the meta will help you team build better and also help you battle better, because you get to understand how the interactions work during the games, and then this way it'll better plan out how turns play out in the future, right? So first of all, I want to start right here. So this is like the main guy, CSR for short, but of course Calyrex Shadow Rider. So max speed timid will hit a 222 stat, right? That means to outspeed it, you're going to need about 224 there, right? So now the question is, listen, the CSR is the fastest thing in the format. So how do I outspeed that if it's the fastest Pokemon? So there are ways to get around it. First of all, you have Tailwind on your team. So coming from something like Whimsicott or Tornadus more commonly. There are other Pokemon that are non-Prankster related that can give you Tailwind, of course. But understand that with Tailwind, just divide by 2. So you need 112 for outspeeding the Shadow Rider. Okay, that's the first thing. So if you're especially a slow Pokemon there, if you can at least hit the 112 mark, that will help you outspeed the CSR under Tailwind support. Now that being said, what if you don't have Tailwind? What if you have a +1 boost on your side for something like a Choice Scarf, for example, or maybe a -1 reduction on the CSR? So for example, maybe like you clicked Electro Webs, or maybe you clicked Icy Wind. Either way, if you have that plus or -1 factor, then you only need 149. So a few examples of that look like this. So let's go into Showdown just to show you a couple Pokemon that kind of aim for these speed tiers, just so that you understand, what some of these team comps look like with some of these spreads. So I've got Urshifu and Kyogre on the screen here, just as like two prime examples for this. So first of all, you commonly see the Choice Scarf on the Urshifu. Why? Because a couple of reasons. First of all, if you can go Adamant here and then you go max speed, you actually hit 149 in particular, and that already lets you outspeed the Shadow Rider, right? And then that means you can just go max speed attack here, so this way you get more damage, and you don't have to necessarily go for the Jolly set because you have the Scarf, which lets you outspeed the Shadow Rider naturally, right? This is the same reason why Chi-Yus also go for Scarf variants, right? And they don't even need to go for Timid either. They can also just go max speed Modest with the Scarf idea, and then again 152 actually speed creeps the Urshifu by 3 points, so you also outspeed the CSR for that matter. And sometimes people, if they're a little bit more adventurous, they'll actually just take a couple points off here. They'll probably just go to about 150 and then just reinvest these points in a tiny little bit more bulk like this, right? So at least they're still speed creeping the Urshifu by a couple points there, and then they can still outspeed the CSR anyway with the Choice Scarf variant, right? So some people will do it something like that. And then the Kyogre here, all right? So a couple ideas with the Kyogre. First of all, if you do go the Scarf variant, Scarf Ogre, right? You can't do it with a Modest variant, right? Because 142 is a little bit short, but what you can do is actually go Timid and still go for, this mark, right? You can still go either 149 or 150 either way. Then just go max special attack like this, and then just reinvest these EVs into your leftover bulk like this. The same thing that we were doing with the Chi over here, you can do the exact same thing with the Choice Scarf Kyogre, right? Now that being said, if you don't want to go with the Scarf Ogre, if you rather have Protect but still have some damage, this is why some of these Mystic Water variants, which is most Kyogres, right? They'll go with a Modest variant, but they'll only go to about 112, okay? And something like this is just like super bulky, right? And we did see this a little bit more in Sword and Shield, where you can just go something like this, go like Modest 156, again, still more than the Timid Ogre set, and then just reinvest your EVs like this, and then just dump the rest here into physical defense. And then this is also, again, under the Tornadus Tailwind, which most Kyogre teams are on, where they will go for this speed tier, okay, and then still have some bulk where they can very handily take that Grassy Glide from a Rillaboom very, very, very well, right? Especially after the nerf to Grassy Glide there. You don't even need this much investment technically. But again, the fact of the matter is you can play this slower, but still outspeed the main threat in the meta just because you have Tailwind on your team. And then that lets you go for more bulk, and then you have, still a ton of damage that you would have more than the Scarf variant, right? So those are just a couple of examples that you can do. I've also seen something like this with Raging Bolt. So imagine, let me take these guys off the screen a little bit. Imagine Tornadus, Chio, Raging Bolt. We actually spoke about this trio in the previous Magenta video. This is why sometimes they'll just go like modest, 112 here again, and then they just get to outspeed it and then just go for a potential KO on the CSR, right? So you can even just do some spread like this where you're just investing, some bulk here. I'm just going to go something like this, very general, right? But again, the whole point is that you can hit this 112 mark with Tornadus, and then even just go for a Snarl on it, right? Snarl it down, neuter its damage, you outspeed it, and then just go from there, okay? So the CSR, those are the two numbers, 112 as well as 149. All right, so the next speed tier that I want to look at is what we call the base 135s. So again, your Koraidons, your Miraidons, your Chien-Paos, and your Flutter Manes, these are all within the same speed tier. So the max speed Jolly variants or the max speed Timid, if you are a special attacker, of course, either way, it doesn't matter. You're going to be hitting that 205 stat, right? So then what beats 205? Obviously, you're going to need to go for 206. And then for the modest Adamant variants, okay, that are still max speed, they cap at 187, which means you're going to need 188. So then the question is, how are you going to do this if you, for example, have Tailwind on your team? So if you've got Tailwind and you want to just outspeed the Timid Jolly variants, then you just need 103, right? Because 103 times 2 will get you to 206. That will help you do that. Otherwise, if you have a Scarf idea, or if you have something like Dragon Dance or Quiver Dance, or, if you inflicted Icy Wind or Electro Webs, then you only need 138. So, think about like some of your slower yet faster mid-tier Pokemon, like something like Entei or another base speed 100 that can, go for this and maybe have a little bit more bulk. But ideally, again, 138 is what you're looking for. And then for the modest Adamant variants, again, you just need 94 with Tailwind, because again, that will get you to 188. Or if you have the plus or minus 1 factor, then you just need about 126. So again, this is all, oh yeah, let me go to Showdown just to show you who would be going for that second idea. Let me show you this. So in some of my other videos, you may have seen me do like Life Orb, Raging Bolt with max speed here. So this is the idea. So sometimes, if you do have an Icy Wind infliction on your team from something like a Flutter Mane, they can both be on the same team relatively well. For example, let's say if you put both of these on Koraidon, for example, right? This is probably going to be in one of the videos, coming up, but let's say you had Flutter Mane here with the Icy Wind, and then you just go max speed Raging Bolt here. So after the Flutter Mane Icy Wind, now your Raging Bolt at max speed will outspeed those other base 135s, which is important. So if you could get that onto a Miraidon, for example, then you can just KO it immediately with a Draco Meteor if it doesn't Terra, of course. You can pressure it that way or force out the Terra, in that sense. But that's how you're going to beat it. So you outspeed with the Icy Wind, and then afterwards you just click Draco Meteor, because again, you are max speed Raging Bolt here, and you do hit that speed tier. So that's like why I did that in some of those other videos. And then afterwards, you just do a little bit of Life Orb optimization and a little bit of hitting the bumps there in the special attack stat. But again, I achieved the speed tier first that I want, and then that kind of guides the rest of the investment. Now, for something like a Flutter Mane there, I kind of like to separate it a little bit, just from the other base 135s, just because of the ability, photosynthesis, and the item booster energy, right? Because usually they'll get like a speed boost from it, and usually that's how they outspeed the mirror, for that matter. But it depends on how much investment they have. So let's say, for example, they're still modest, but still max speed, right? So they're still getting a speed boost in that sense, right? Maybe they're like modest 36 and then just 252 in speed. Like you still get a speed boost anyway, even though you are modest nature. So, you still need that 188 factor, right? And then just 142 with Tailwind can beat that. So something like Ogre with choice, with the Tornadus Tailwind, that you can still beat the modest variants on Flutter Mane that way, which is why you don't see it all that often, right? This is why most of these Flutter Manes, they go a little bit more timid, so this way they don't run into that scenario, right? And then that puts us to the purple text below here, where if they are max speed timid, so timid 252 with the boost, right? So that means you need 308, right? And with Tailwind, so that means you need 154 investment there. Now, unfortunately, something like Chi-Yu loses out to that just because you cap at 152. So you have to take into account in terms of that, but at least you understand how the numbers work for that. So there's other Pokemon, that can achieve this very easily, by just going by, either their Jolly variants or their timid variants. So you can still do it that way and then just go for like more bulk, even if you still max out your damage there. And you have a little bit less speed just because you just need a little bit for that benchmark there, but at least you know how the numbers work. So just keep this into mind, right? Because again, when you look at team preview, peek at the item on Flutter Mane, whether it's booster energy or not, and then that will determine, what type of investment or what kind of speed it can hit just by either having the booster energy or not having the booster energy. The base 100s is like classic VGC. So when we say base 100s, immediately the first number that should come to mind is 167. So stuff like Chi-Yu or Entei that are pretty common right now in this format. And then like other formats, like for example, regulationG, you had stuff like Charizard or Volcarona, for example. But anyway, they still fall within that same category of having a base stat of 100. So that means you need 112, with a +1, either a Dragon Dance, Icy Wave, Thunder Wave, whatever. Not Thunder Wave, Electro Web. Or just 84 under Tailwind. This is why some Incineroars, they go for 84 speed, so this way when they have Tornadus on their team, they can outspeed these base 100s, and then they can go for a parting shot first onto them, right? That's usually the goal there. That's usually what I do with my Incineroars sometimes. So this way we can have that play. Otherwise, the modest or adamant variants, like you saw with the Chi-Yu, they just go for 152 there when they are max speed, but not the speed nature. So 154 can easily outspeed these guys. So, just to take that into account for that. So something like Ogerpons, for example, can go for some stuff like this. So here's the hard flame, right? So for example, just as a sample build here, I can go adamant here and I will go for, that speed tier about 154 right here. So you can do it like this, and then you can even just do this 155. And then after this, you still have 312 points of EVs. So you can even just go like adamant 56 to the bump there. And then after this, these 156 EVs that are remaining are just leftover EVs at this point. You can just dump the rest into HP like this and then just be done with it. And then you can just go with your moves there, right? But again, I'm hitting that speed tier first, and then I'm investing into my other stats, right? So just take into account that. Or if you want to go with the other way, right, you can still go Jolly here, okay, and do this, right? So you see how we can already cap at 168 here. You could do it like this, or even just go 1 point more for a little bit of speed creep. This is also going to be for Landorus, which we'll mention next. But you can just do something like this, and then, max your attack like this, and then these are just like leftovers. You could just dump like that. And again, you still outspeed those base 100s anyway, right? By just, going by a Jolly variant, but not max speed, right? Because you don't need to. You have so much base stat anyway. You don't need completely max, right, to outspeed those base 100s. So now you can afford a little bit more bulk into your EVs just because you don't need as much for that speed to your investment. Okay, so for the base 111s and even the base 110s, so typically your Tornadus and your Ogerpons, if they're max speed Jolly or max speed timid, if they do have a sash on the Tornadus, for example, then ideally, the numbers are 179 and 178. So you need about 180, right, to outspeed both of these guys. And then a 120 speed stat with a +1 factor can help you do that. But what's also interesting about these guys is that sometimes if they don't have that sash, then they just go like a lot more bulkier, and then they go slower just to outspeed base 100s, and then their leftover EVs go into their bulk stats, right? And I'm going to show you how that works just for Tornadus, just like as a general example, and then something that takes into the speed tier of Ogerpons, just to try it out and outspeed that. I'll show you what that looks like right here. All right, so I've got Zamazenta on the screen here along with Tornadus. Not the fact that they're both on the same team. I'm just trying to use them as separate examples just to reiterate the point that I was making on the slide here. So for Zamazenta, if I want to outspeed Ogerpons Heartflame, because again, I don't want to be taking a +1 IV Cudgel, that's just going to hurt way too much. So if I want to be able to outspeed that, I need that 180 stat, and I can do that, okay? So if I just go max speed okay, just without any speed nature, I can do that. And then I can just go with Impish here and then just go for something like this where I have a little bit of investment, right? Or I can just go even more, a little bit even further, just to even this much, and then just dump the rest here into HP like this, and then the leftovers go into something like this, right? So that's one example. Or I could even just go like a Jolly variant, right? You could do Jolly and then still achieve that same idea where you're just going to 180 here and then just start maxing your defense like this. A little bit less in terms of your bulk, right? But at least now you still have 48 EVs leftovers for, you know, that you could dump into HP like this. And then this could be another Zamazenta set that can outspeed the Jolly Ogerpons. So if you want to do it like that, you can. Otherwise, you know, the Tornadus example, okay? So if you want to just outspeed base 100s, right? So you could do that with Timid Nature. You can just go 167, 168. You could just do something like this. And if you had the Covert Cloak item and not the Sash, so now, you know, maybe you want a little bit more bulk. You still have 336 EVs left to play with. Just max your HP, obviously, at 1 point in your special attack. And these 80 EVs can be divided up however you want. You could just easily do something like this, right? Get a stat of 100 perfect, you know, in terms of your defense. And then this could be a typical Tornadus Covert Cloak set, right? Where again, you're just outspeeding based on hundreds, something like a Chiyu. Then you just invest a little bit more into your HP and your defense, just so that you're a little bit fatter, that you can stay on the field for a little bit longer and click your support moves or the occasional Bleak Wind Storms. But either way, this is one way to do it in terms of like take into account that tier that we spoke about and then reinvesting the rest of the EVs into your bulk. Landorus-Incarnate is another one that you can also take into account. Now, what's really unique about Landorus is that it outspeeds the base 100s by 1 point. So, you know, Chiyu very threatening, but then Landorus just outspeeds it naturally, which is pretty big, right? Because then you can just KO it with something like an Earth Power, ideally. So sometimes when you invest for beating base 100s, you might as well just take into account Landorus because it's just another point separation there. So you can do it like that if you want. So I can show you something like Zamazenta once again, because Zamazenta also does not want to deal with the Landorus-Incarnate. So you can actually drop your speed a little bit more if you don't, if you're not worried about the Ogerpon per se, but you're more focused on the Landorus. So you can invest more into your bulk that way, and then, you know, take into account of the speed with the Landorus, because again, you're reducing your speed, but then those extra EVs can go more into your defense or it can go more into HP. So back to, you know, Zamazenta. So what does that look like? So, you know, we'll adjust the EVs and the speed yet again. We'll just go up to about 169 here, right? So this frees up a lot more EVs just in terms of where we can put them in terms of our attacking stat and our bulk. So what you can do is just go right here, Impish 84, right? And then you can just max your HP like this. And then you just have leftovers that you can go into your SpDef and your attacking stat, right? So now you're a slower Zamazenta, but you are a little bit more bulkier, right? So this way you can take some of those IV cudgels from that Ogerpon Heartflame. When I mean some, I mean like one. So, but again, you have more bulk there. So you can go for something like this if you care more about this speed tier. Otherwise, you know, just go a little bit faster and outspeed the Heartflame Ogerpon and take a little bit less from your HP stat and a little bit more into your defense there. So in that regard, you see how the EV spread changes depending on your speed tier, but at least you have a goal with the speed tier, okay? Don't just like, you know, put whatever and say, okay, I'm gonna just call it. Like, you at least have a definitive goal that you can do with those speed tiers. So again, it actually has some idea in terms of what you want to do with that EV spread. So the Urshifu, so again, we mentioned them a little bit towards the beginning part of the video. Again, the Rapid Strike or even the Single Strike can even just go for Adamant 149. With that Scarf, you can outspeed the CSR by 1 point. Jolly, they go to 163, so a little bit short from the base speed 100. So that's also something to take into account. So you just need about Jolly 165 or Timid 165 at the bump mark, you know, just to outspeed both of these Urshifu. But again, when you do see EV investments, like if you see like 150 or if you see 165 for that matter, you know that they're either outspeeding the Adamant Urshifus or the Jolly Urshifus. So just remember that. All right, your base 90s, so something like a Kyogre or the Groudon, which is slowly rising in usage now. Again, max speed, they're going at 156, but usually you'll see Kyogres go for this more than the Groudon per se. And then modest max speed Ogre, again, hits at 142, right? So Kyogre will, you know, usually have Tornadus, you know, for the Tailwind support. So this way you can go slower and just go modest variants and then just hit other speed tiers, because again, you only need 112 for the CSR. right? Like we showed you earlier. So you can just go a little bit more into your bulk and try and live other things. Whereas Groudon, usually you'll never see them at max speed. Usually they'll go with some speed investment just to outspeed some threats, right? But at the end of the day, they just rely a little bit more on their bulk to, you know, withstand certain attacks there. 112 is already like good enough, you know, under Tailwind for the CSR, as we saw like back in Sword and Shield days. But usually, even if they don't have Tailwind, they don't really have that much support. Even just like some simple Icy Winds or Tailwind, Icy Winds or Electro Webs coming from the Flutter Manes or the Ragey Bolts that are often partners with Groudon right now. Usually that's like more than enough for what Groudon wants to outspeed. And after that, it's just like, okay, yeah, that's it. But I will show you something like with Tornadus and how that their investment affects, you know, something like the Kyogre here. So for something like a Tornadus, if you want to be a little bit faster than a Kyogre, for example, but still deal some damage, this is where like a modest set can come into play. So you can just go about 157 here, or even 158 like this, just for speed creep purposes. And then just go modest 36. So this way you have like some damage on your side, and then just go max HP, and then 1 point in the defenses and special defense, right? So again, I'm outspeeding my Ogres, or other Ogres for that matter. I can hit them first with a Bleak Wind Storm, right? Which can, you know, matter in terms of speed reduction or picking up a KO there. And I still have a good amount of bulk where I can still take some decent hits and still can make good use out of my Covert Cloak if I can't afford the Focus Sash here on a Tornadus. All right, so your base 60s and up to 65, of course, because of Pelipper here. So, you know, these were like very common in Regulation H. There were so many Pokemon that fell within this speed tier, but in Regulation G, the three big ones, of course, are Pelipper, Instant, and Farigiraf here. And they can go all kinds of sets here, right? And it all depends on what they want to do. So, for example, Pelipper can go, you know, max speed with the Sash, and, you know, if they're modest or versus timid, you know, modest, they cap at, I believe, 117, and then timid, you know, you need 128 because they cap at, I think it's like 127, for example, right? So that's something that you have to remember that. And then, you know, for something like Incineroar, which is kind of funny, right? Because sometimes, you know, whether or not they have anywhere from 80 to 89 speed, you know, sometimes a little bit more, depending on how fast you want to be for your fake out. But sometimes they have what's called max speed, okay? Max speed Incin is something that we saw at regional play a little bit towards the later part of Regulation G, the first go around. And what's interesting about max speed Incin, you know, just a couple things, whether you're Jolly Incin or whether you're not Jolly Incin, but still max speed. So if I show you that real quick here, you know, it's very interesting just in terms of what the numbers show. Let me just readjust this. Okay, so like max speed here, let's go with the non Jolly variant. Like it hits 112, which is kind of funny. So Incin max speed with Tailwind actually just outspeeds CSR. And then you can just go for a knockoff if it hasn't teared already. And they don't know this, right? If you're in a best of 3 tournament until it actually happens. So this is some surprise that you could pull in like game 1, where you can just go for that knockoff immediately. Think that the CSR, that, you know, they think that, oh, even though Incin's max speed under Tailwind, I'm still faster. But then they see that your Incin outspeeds them, and they're like, is that max speed Incin? And they're like, oh, okay. So then they have to make an adjustment in games 2 and 3, right? So you have to take into account that. And then if it is like Jolly max speed Instant, they hit at 123 here. So something like again, 120 is another benchmark in VGC, because again, with the +1, you outspeed some stuff like Ogerpons and Tornaduses. So you get to speed creep that idea. So if you have some, you know, multipliers like Icy Wind or Electro Webs on your side, then, you know, your own max speed Jolly Instant can outspeed some of those threats and go for a parting shot immediately, right? So something like that is kind of nutty. So just be aware of the interactions with Incineroar, right? It just depends on what they want to do. But ideally, you know, these generally tend to be on like the slower side. Usually you'll see something like, not even like Adamant here. Let me just go like Bolt Nature, for example. Let me just do something like this, where you're like at 84, you know, just this under Tailwind will outspeed base 100s. That's really all you need. That will be good enough for the Mirror, for example. But again, just be aware of the interactions that I just showed you. All right, the last important speed tier for now that I want to point to you is, you know, the base 50s. So stuff like Calyrex, Ice Rider, the Ursalunas, and the Iron Hands. These are very common Trick Room sweepers. And generally, you know, they don't have any speed to begin with, or very, very little, right? So if they are the Brave or Quiet variant, they'll go at 49 speed, which means, you know, 0 IVs in that regard. But what's pretty funny about these guys is if they're on Tailwind teams, like especially the Bloodwind Ursaluna, they can actually outspeed the Calyrex Shadow Rider, because max speed Calyrex Ice Rider hits 112. So under Tailwind, you get to outspeed the CSR. And we did see a little bit of that towards the later part of Sword and Shield. But again, the Blood Moon or Saluna just hits 114 anyway at max speed, so you can outspeed that also. But again, as like the reverse side, you know, with the quiet natures and the brave natures, this is why Clefairies are really good right now. And let me show you something with the EV spread there. All right, so again, just in Showdown here, so I've got both Calyrex and Iron Hands here, for example, two of the same speed tiers. They're brave, they both hit 49, right? But what's really cool about Clefairy is that you can actually underspeed them and either go for something like After You in Trick Room, where your sweeper gets to go before them in Trick Room, or you can sing them to death, because in Trick Room, if you just sing them, then it's very punishing, because then they just lose all their Trick Room turns and they can't take advantage of the momentum that they would get with the Trick Room, right? So usually they'll go with something like this with an Impish nature, right? And then they'll just, you know, drop their IVs a little bit, right? So they'll just go Impish, but then just go like this much, right? I think it's like 16 or something like that. Yeah, something like this, right? So like right here, 16 IVs investment. So now look at this. Now you're at 48 speed, which means you get to be faster than these guys in Trick Room, which is kind of funny. And then after that, you can do whatever you want with your EVs, right? You can just go like to the benchmarks here and then just do, you know, I'll just put it like this, you know, something like this, right? And then that's it. Then you can just, you know, be faster than the CSRs or Iron Hands under Trick Room, sing them or After You. Either way, you know, just 16 investments in that speed stat over there puts it at 48. And that's all you need in terms of, you know, underspeeding these big behemoths in that Trick Room idea. But anyway, that's it. So those are your more notable speed tiers in regulationG. Hopefully this gives some idea and perspective for why some Pokemon are EV'd the way they are, right? And again, this is going to help you for your team building purposes if you're still having trouble, figuring out what kind of investment you need on some of your guys. It starts with the speed, okay? The speed is the most important stat in VGC. After that, then you can do, you know, stuff with your bulk and your attacking stat, but the speed is the most important thing. And you know, knowing these key benchmarks that I've shown you today will help you in your early regulationG adventures. All right, but that's it for now, folks. You know, again, if you need some help, make sure you sign up for coaching on the channel. If you look in the video description below, as well as in the comment section, there is a link to join the channel with a tier 3 sub. If you're trying to go to a regional, if you need some help with, you know, ladder play or online tournaments, sign up for a coaching session with me, and then we can help you out and get you a team that you need with good optimized EV spreads there. So we can make your learning process a little bit faster than what it is already. Okay, so sign up and then, you know, you can join the Discord, but you can even join that right now. It's free. And then, you know, you can just message me when you do sign up, and then we can coordinate, you know, from there. All right, but that's it for now, folks. We'll be back with another video in the next one. Peace out. Happy New Year. Until the next one.